This is John for Johnny's Beat. I'm back on the beat. Today I'm joined by Mike Pankow of Windy City Slam. How are you, Mike?
Great, John. Great to hear from you. It's been a few months since we ran into each other at C2E2, and now with the whole pandemic going on, it's glad to hear a familiar voice.
Yeah, we that was like the last thing we did before the pandemic hit.
Yeah, it really was.
Strange.
Hmm.
So you're coming up on the 2 year anniversary of Windy City Slam.
Yes.
Tell us how it got started. I know you're a longtime journalist. I know you're a longtime wrestling fan. So why did you start Windy City Slam?
Well, it's a convergence of two of my passions, two things that I really love: the journalism business itself, and of course, professional wrestling. And both of those passions go back to my youth, when I was probably like 10 years old or so. I used to scour like the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times sports pages, especially the Sports Agate, which I thought was really, really cool. I love sports stats. I love sports, period. And then my mom and dad got me hooked on professional wrestling. We first started watching stuff like the Von Erichs on World Class Championship Wrestling, WWF with Hulk Hogan, and eventually like the AWA on ESPN, NWA on Saturday nights on TBS once we finally got cable. So that was really, really cool. I just loved it. And about the evolution of Windy City Slam, to kind of fast forward to that a little bit about 2 years ago this month, I was hoping to actually launch in June of 2018. A couple of events happened that kind of pushed it back a little bit. Um, Started up with Squarespace because initially, at first, it was just a wrestling website. I wanted to report on news. I mean, I love WWE. I love like the bigger promotions, but I was always interested in the local scene, the independent scene as well. Where do these guys come from? How do they get molded? I mean, and there's even independent guys that are always, they're independent forever. I mean, they're longtime guys. They work the indie scene for like 20, 25 years. And I'm like, okay, this sounds like an interesting endeavor. And maybe one day I'll be able to cover some WWE stuff. And I've done it a little bit in my career with my shoot job, so to speak. But yeah, I just thought it's time to do something fun. The journalism business was a little up and down, and I wanted to apply my skills and my talent to something that I really, really loved, and that's professional wrestling. So that came together. The seed started to plant around this time 2 years ago in June of 2018. Was able to get a Squarespace account and then hosting and all that. Started putting some stuff together. And my first big story was a story that I did back with my shoot job. Probably, let's see, wow, it's been almost 18 years since I did that story. It was a story about Christopher Nowinski, who at that point in 2002 was part of WWE. He had just started coming up with the company, and he was a young kid. And little did I know until I started doing a little research that he was from the Chicago area. So I'm like, this is a fun story. So I went ahead and pursued that, and we've kind of been on and off contacts, on and off friends, pretty much since then. So he was one of my first people that I've gotten to know in the wrestling business. So, ironically enough, Chris has an event in Chicago back in June of 2018. So I email him. I explain to him I'm starting this new project, this new endeavor, new website. I would love to do an interview with you and a story about the Concussion Legacy Foundation, which used to be the Sports Legacy Institute, and what he's done with that and kind of changed the sports world and studying the brain and CTE and stuff like that, and also to kind of catch up with him after 18 years previously interviewing him about his WWE career. So that was a whole lot of fun. I went to this huge gala in Chicago, ran into guys like Gary Fensick, Doug Plank, Jerry Hester, who used to be with the Fighting Illini years ago.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think, the former Colts defensive back who, not a defensive back, maybe a linebacker who played in the Super Bowl, I think. Taiwan Hagler from Bishop McNamara was also there. So there's all kinds of different sports people that I've watched on TV or gotten acquainted with over the years. And I'm like, this is really, really cool. Chris gave me about 10 to 15 minutes of his time. And it turned out to be a great story on my website. That was like kind of a lead-off story to the whole Windy City Slam phenomenon.
No, I know. Obviously, you cover the big leagues. You cover, Impact, WWE, AEW.
Yes.
But in the absence, although it's starting to pick up now, but in the absence of independent wrestling, what did you find yourself covering during that? Did you stay strictly with AEW, with the big leagues?
I started a podcast this year for the first time. Let me get into that a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is.
You beat me to it, man. I was bringing that up next.
Yeah. 23 episodes we've done so far. And to kind of lead up into where we're at right now with that, a couple years ago on Facebook, I decided to just kind of look up acquaintances that I used to know from my past. So I knew this guy from UIC. His name is Chris Lanuti. He actually worked with me at the Chicago Flame, the student newspaper there, for a year. Well, he studied for a year before transferring to the University of Illinois. He eventually went there, got his degree, and got into radio. So he was a morning host in various parts of the country. He did all kinds of stuff. So he has an extensive radio background. And a little over a decade ago, he decided to get into podcasting. So he has a bunch of great podcasts out there. Sox in the Basement is probably one of his biggest podcasts. He talks about the Chicago White Sox, of course. Then he's got Me and the Priest, where he talks with a local priest in Evergreen Park. Also, the EP podcast, which is an Evergreen Park podcast. And I'm trying to remember and obviously the Broadcast Basement. That's where I came in. He decided to ping me on Messenger after seeing a lot of my wrestling posts on Facebook. Say, hey, would you like to be a guest on my podcast sometime, the Broadcast Basement? So I was like, okay, let's do it. So I came on 5-10 minute segment. Went great. He said, why don't you become a regular? We'll have you on every couple weeks. So then I started coming to his home studio, which is his house in Evergreen Park. He's got a bar in his basement, which is really, really nice. And that's where he records all of his podcasts. So every couple weeks we'd hang out, talk about not only the national scene, but the local scene as well. I mean, it's kind of an untapped territory in terms of media. Yeah, there's a few podcasts out there that are pretty good about local wrestling, but I kind of want to mix the local stuff with the big boys. And that's kind of what we did with the Broadcast Basement for maybe 7-8 months. And then late last year, Chris comes up to me and he's like, why don't we try this as a full standalone podcast? And I'm like, right away, yeah, sure, let's give it a roll. So in January of this year, January of 2020, we started the Windy City Slam podcast. So it's me and Chris, 30 minutes every week. We kind of have a little tagline, and he does this for all of his podcasts, 30 minutes of good. So we try to stick within 30, maybe 32, 33, 34 minutes a week. We don't want to go overboard with it. We cover some of the big stuff like in WWE, AEW. If an Impact story comes up, we talk about that. It's usually about Tessa Blanchard, which is somebody that we both talk about a lot. And then we talk about the local scene, places like Warrior Wrestling, Freelance Wrestling, AAW, and some of the other shows that I cover, like Freelance Underground and such. And it's a really, really fun little show. The pandemic, unfortunately, has kind of thrown a little wrench into our plans, but I'm hearing that we're still doing some pretty good numbers, and we're trying to build something good with this little podcast.
No, it's absolutely, like you said, there's not a whole lot of coverage of everything combined. You got each promotion kind of may or may not have their own stuff, but you're kind of pulling it all together, which is interesting from a fan's viewpoint. And I'm a fan, so there you go. Mm-hmm. But you're coming up on the 2-year anniversary. Do you have any specific plan? Is there any surprise coming up for Windy City Slam?
Well, I'm kind of pondering what my next step is with stories. I don't know if I'm just going to start getting back to reporting like little tidbit stories until stuff starts up. I mean, I have plenty of interviews in my mind of guys who I want to talk to, not only for the podcast, but for the stories as well. To backpedal a little bit, I've had the honor and privilege of talking to some of the biggest stars in the business. Mick Foley at Wizard World a couple years ago. Obviously, you were there helping me film the interview for a video portion of it, which is really, really cool. And I appreciate that, John, very much.
Anytime, my friend.
And Tommy Dreamer, and you filmed that one for me as well. And then I also talked to Jay Lethal over the phone last year when he was still the ROH champion and the longest reigning Ring of Honor champion. That was a cool interview. He was a good guy. That was about 17 minutes of a lot of fun. Frankie Kazarian was my first AEW interview.
Wow.
I went digging. I was hoping to get Christopher Daniels because of his connection with Windy City Wrestling and Chicago. But they decided to give me Frankie instead. You know, they're his partner in SCU. And Frankie was terrific. I mean, we talked about all kinds of stuff. His cigar line he's got with Cody, his music career. And this was right around at the beginning of AEW. So we kind of got into, you know, why they all decided to band together and make this AEW promotion. So, yeah, I've had a lot of little fun interviews and some great stuff, too. Going back to January of last year, I actually got the privilege to do an in-person interview with Stephen Merchant, who a lot of people know is from developed The Office in the UK.
Right.
And the impetus behind Fighting with My Family, the movie about Paige. So I actually got to interview him in downtown Chicago, and then I got to see a screening of the movie before the interview, and like 3 weeks before the movie even came out, and even before it showed at Sundance. So I was probably one of the first people to see Fighting with My Family, which I thought was a really, really cool moment. And another feather in my cap, personally. Totally a lot of fun.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna put you a little bit on the spot.
Okay.
What do you think is the future of AEW?
I think they're going to be successful. I mean, so far they've kind of shown, you know, in a limited sample size that you know, they won't just be a WCW type clone where some people were a little worried about, okay, they're on TNT, okay, they have Tony Schiavone as an announcer, you know, they're going to be, oh, it's TNT, it's Turner, so it's WCW all over again. And they're fighting with WWE or NXT. But I think NXT is good. I think AEW is going to be successful. Although this past week, and I'll talk about this on my podcast coming up next week, little tease there.
Scoop.
NXT beat AEW in the ratings, and quite decisively. You know, I mean, they've only beat them a few times, but this is probably the biggest margin of victory for NXT in the Wednesday Night War. So, little tease there for next week. But yeah, I think AEW is on the right track. Cody Rhodes is a good mind for the business. And a lot of people want to rip on Tony Khan for being a fanboy, but I actually kind of like what he's doing. I mean, he's doing a good job with the presentation. He's bringing a lot of different talents in. And actually, one of my favorite things about AEW right now is their Dark program. Because what they're doing right now with AEW Dark is bringing in a lot of independent talent. Guys like Robert Ego Anthony, you know, guys like Joe Alonzo from the Chicago area. And they're getting shots like every week or every couple weeks on TV performing against some of the AEW heavy hitters. And Ego Anthony has really, really shown very well. And I kind of hope this finally, after 15 to 20 years in the business, this is his break.
Well, I love Ego. I don't know if Ego totally wants to have a huge break. It seems like he's happy in his life, but whichever way, I'm a huge Ego fan. So whatever way he goes, I'm cheering for him. And you're absolutely right. It's cool to see guys like him. Sugar Dunkerton's on there. Melanie Cruz was on.
Yeah, he's a regular.
John Schuyler, although he just hurt his leg, so he's out.
Assistance Pro Champion, yes.
So who do you see in the near future, say the next year or two? Who do you see as like the next kind of breakout guy or girl
in AEW?
Anywhere
or anywhere? Wow. I really like Keith Lee in NXT, and he's a guy that's been around for maybe a dozen years or 14 years or something like that. But I think he has a blend of size, speed, strength, and agility that not a lot of people can match. And he has this kind of bubbling charisma, which is just waiting to kind of come out. And I think at some point when WWE decides it's time to bring him up to the main roster, maybe once we have fans in the stands again on a regular basis, I think that's when you're going to see him come out and shine. And it doesn't hurt that he's black too. I think he appeals to all demographics with his personality and his style in the ring. And I think he's the next big star in professional wrestling, just as long as they don't screw it up.
Good point there at the end. No, it's a very good pick.
Yes.
Going from current or future, I should say, let's peel it back just a little bit older school. Who is your guy? Who is your like 2 or 3 guys growing up or when you were an adult? Anytime, like your top 3 or 4 guys of all time for
All
you
time.
personally.
Encompassing my entire life?
Yeah, for you personally though, not necessarily the greatest guy, but your favorites.
Yeah, well, when I was a kid, like most other people, was Hulk Hogan. But then as I started getting older, I started gravitating more toward heels and more toward kind of guys that were sometimes baby faces, like Randy Macho Man Savage, especially since he had that Chicago connection.
Sure.
Than that. And one of my favorites of all time, and I still think he's up there, even though he's been out of the spotlight for the most part the last 6 or 7 years, is CM Punk. He's a guy who had a huge passion and love for the business. He obviously came up in the Chicago Independents, fought his way into Ring of Honor, had a cup of coffee with TNA Impact, and then finally got to WWE. And even after being suppressed a little bit, broke out of the shell, kind of broke the glass ceiling, became a main eventer, even though he still never got to the John Cena level. Kind of ticked me off a little bit, but
ticked him off a little bit too.
Yes, it did, as we know. But yeah, he's one of my all-time favorites as well. I'd have to throw Ric Flair in there, obviously, both heel and face Ric Flair, but probably more heel Ric Flair. And a couple other guys when I was growing up, and even now I appreciate a lot more than I did when I was younger. Guys like Ted DiBiase, Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig.
Sure.
You know, the great heels of the late 80s, early 90s, who always got thrown in there with Hogan and fed to Hogan. But I always appreciated their ring work and all that. And I'm trying to think of a few guys from today. I do like Keith Lee as a current guy. He's one of my current favorites. Adam Cole's another guy. I mean, him in the Undisputed Era, they just ooze charisma. They have that coolness factor, that hip factor. People just love them. In terms of, let's see, maybe like somebody on the Chicago independent scene who does independence on the regular. Now, I mentioned his name earlier, Robert Ego Anthony. And
yes,
the fact that he has the flexibility to portray a babyface character as egotistical fantastico or a heel character as Robert Ego Anthony, I think is just terrific. The guy has great range. His work in the ring is excellent. He can work with anybody. He's a pretty good guy. He's from my neck of the woods now where I live in Joliet. Actually, I ran into him at a Five Below around Christmas time. He had his son there, and they were looking at the same thing I was looking at, WWE figures against the wall for $5.
Of course. Yeah. Now, you won't get an argument from me. Ego has a long time been a fan, or I've been a long time fan of his, I should say, going way back to 10 years ago when I first saw him, and I'm probably late to the party on that. But from the moment I first saw him, that guy had something special. He's in the ring, out of the ring, and he's a good dude. He's a family guy, got 2 beautiful kids, a wonderful wife. Yes. He's a teacher in his shoe job. And, like you said, it's fantastic seeing him on TV now. I wish Ego all the best, man. I'm a huge fan.
And other indie guys that I kind of like, and I'll throw a few names out there too, that I've gotten to know over the last couple of years just by watching them in the ring. Brice Benjamin, who is another guy that plays like a ton of roles on the scene. He could be face, he could be heel. He's part of a tag team with Acid Jazz. He also does like One Sexy Mofo. I mean, his range is awesome. Another really nice, cool guy is Matt Nix. And he runs freelance wrestling. He's been in the business for about a decade. Real cool young guy. He gets it. And a real quick story about Matt Nix. I was at a freelance underground show up in Joliet a few months ago before the pandemic struck here. And there he is helping to break down the ring after the show. And this is a guy who could probably be like, okay, I've been in the business 10 years. I don't have to do this. But he's setting the example for the younger talent by cleaning up, picking up the chairs, breaking down the ring and all that, which I think is so awesome. He's a great role model for young talent. Matt Nix is a great guy. Anytime freelance wrestling plays in the area, you should definitely pay them a visit or check them out at independentwrestlingtv.com. I mean, great stuff.
No, yeah. Once again, I agree with you, man. I remember Matt from his early days at our pro when he worked his way up the ladder, him and Chris. And they became they became one of the most popular, if not the most popular team there for a while. And
Or
he's
sorry.
done great things with freelance. It's unbelievable.
Yep.
So before I let you go, Mike, this is your shot now. Tell everybody where they could find you, where they could find Windy City Slam.
All right. Here are my plugs. So windycityslam.com is the website. There are my stories and my photos, my interviews, links to my YouTube page, which is my personal YouTube page, at Mike Pankow on YouTube. That's my YouTube channel, where I have a lot of my interviews with professional wrestlers and some other things on there as well. But right now it's kind of become my home for like my Windy City Slam interviews. You could also find the Windy City Slam podcast on the website, as well as the Windy City Slam podcast. We come out every Tuesday, although lately we've been doing live shots on Monday on the Podbean app at noon Chicago time. So Chris and I get on there, just search Windy City Slam on the Podbean app, like on your iPhone, iPad, Android phones, Google Play. You can hit us up there live, and there's an interactive element to the show, so somebody could actually call in and talk to us and ask us questions, which I think is a really cool function. Hopefully we'll actually get a few callers at some point, but I think most of our audience comes from downloads and listening to us later on, like maybe on drives in from work, drives home from work, stuff like that. You can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Google Play, I'm trying to remember all these little things, Podbean, Spotify. I know there's one other one, and I'm kicking myself for not being prepared on this, but yeah, you can find it, and also windycityslam.com. There's actually an area on the homepage where it just says Windy City Slam Podcast. Click on that link, takes you to our player, and that player has the 10 most recent episodes. So check out the Windy City Slam Podcast there. And social media, we are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So we do all kinds of cool pictures from the events that I cover. We do like birthday shout outs to anybody from WWE, AEW on down to local talents and Chicago indie promotions. So I've gotten to know a lot of people the last couple of years, a lot of cool people. So I like to throw out a little happy birthday shout out, every other day.
Absolutely. Why not?
Yeah.
Hey, you even threw it out to me, and I'm not, I'm like way low level on the wrestling scene. So yeah.
Hey, you have a lot of connections in the business, probably even more than I do at this point, in terms of local wrestling.
Well, we'll have to do a joint venture at some point when this whole pandemic thing dies down, buddy.
Your buddy Tommy Ellis, guys like that. You guys have been friends for like what, 20 years?
Tommy about 9, I think, when he first started at Resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
okay.
he won the tryout, and then they made him into a wrestler, and did, he became pretty popular there for a while.
Cool.
Although now it's Resistance is now restarted in Florida. We'll see what happens.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Mike, thank you very much for your time. I'm a big fan of yours, a big fan of Windy City Slam. I love helping you out on it. Hopefully we could do some more work when this whole insanity ends.
Yeah.
But I encourage everyone to check out Windy City Slam, and it's the best place to get your local and world news on wrestling. Thank you, man.
Thank you, Johnny. We'll see you down the line.
Sounds good, buddy. Thanks for your time.
Take care. Johngy's Beat.